Welcome to another Praise in the Morning. This is a short devotion on Psalm 9 today. And before we get into the psalm, just to sort of set out that Psalm 9 is a pair with Psalm 10. It's like two sides of a double-hinged door that folds together and opens and closes. Sometimes we only open one side, sometimes we open the other side, but to fully grasp and to understand what's inside, we have to open both sides of the door. And it opens up and reveals, as it were, parallel truths for us. So there's a lot of structure in this psalm. It's also set out as what's described as an acrostic psalm, and that it's a little bit hidden in the English, and that's why it often isn't always paired together, but it's sort of set out within the Hebrew sort of lettering of the alphabet, of the Hebrew alphabet, throughout the Psalm 9 and 10. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that structure, but just to know that it's there, it's structured, it's intentional, and it is purposeful. So there's two sides of things. Psalm 9 and 10 has often been described as the sort of prayers of verses 13 to 20 of Psalm 9 and verses 12 to 18 of Psalm 10 are often described as prayers of light in the light and prayer in the dark. Not in the sense that it's just about darkness or about light, but the positive aspect of clarity that's seen in Psalm 9 is then reflected into some of the darker shadows of the reality of the justice of God. Where Psalm 10, as it gets into the description from the psalmist, is kind of the psalmist in a bit of a dark pit situation, not really seeing what's going on, but then light shining out, and we get these great phrases of arise that we see in these psalms. Okay, I'm going to read the first couple of verses of Psalm 9, verses 1 and 2. It is a psalm of praise. Praise is not apart from the reality of life. Don't ever think that just praising is an excuse to ignore the reality of life. It isn't. It is best done in reality. Verse 1, I will praise you, O Lord, with all my heart. I will tell of your wonders. I will be glad and rejoice in you. I will sing praise to your name, O Most High. This psalm then leads into discussion of the enemies of David and how God is the righteous judge. The structure is a step structure that goes on in verses 1 through to 12, where in the center of it, we find the statements like verse 8, verse 7 and 8, the Lord reigns forever. He established his throne for judgment. He will judge the world in righteousness. He will govern the peoples with justice. This is the center point. And these verses jump through the different tenses of what David has seen the Lord do to his enemies in the past, what he's seeing God do right now. Okay, God is active and real in the present time, in his present time, and then what he sees that God will do in the future. Okay, he foresees the reality of what God does because of what he has done in the past. And we can have faith and hope in this because if we have an understanding of what God has been like in the past, we know what he can be like, what he is like now, and we know how he's going to act in the future. In that sense, we can have a trust in him. There's a knowable aspect to the nature of God. He's not unknowable. He has made himself known. He has self-revealed himself to us. So there is a hope here and an established trust in God, that God deals righteously. He's done it in the past, he will do it now, and he's going to do it in the future. So no matter what God is doing upon the nations and upon the world, he's doing it in a righteous judgment, and we can have trust and hope in that. This is a big topic and a big discussion, and in our current times, we have to balance the truth, not get so worked up to cast all judgment, but to put our hope in God. And this psalm lays that out, because the psalm in verse 7, the Lord reigns forever. He establishes his throne for judgment. But then he calls upon us In verse 9, the Lord is a refuge for the oppressed, a stronghold in times of trouble. We hear wonderful words. In verse 10, for those who know your name will trust in you. For you, Lord, have never forsaken those who seek you. Sing praises to the Lord enthroned in Zion. Proclaim among the nations what he has done. That's wonderful. For he who avenges blood remembers he does not ignore the cry of the afflicted. This God is a God we can put our hope and our trust in. We can make him our refuge in times of trouble. He does never forsakes those who seek him. Seek God. If you think the words of there in Amos, seek God and live. Those are the words of hope, because he never forsakes those that seek him. He never puts aside those that call upon his name. He hears the cry of the afflicted. He hears the cry of the oppressed, and he knows our situation. So we can put hope in God, what he's been like, what he is doing, and what he's going to do. He's a faithful God, and he's a God who judges righteously. This psalm turns on its head in verse 13 and goes into this psalm of clarity, where the reality of the situation we might have kind of not really expected from the praise at the start of the psalm in verse 13, where it says, "O Lord, see how my enemies persecute me. Have mercy and lift me up from the gates of death." He's not having a great time. Things are not good. The tune, we look at the script at the start of the psalm. It lays out tragedy. It lays out to the tune of the death of the son. Is this linked with the death of David's child? Or is this something bigger, a melody or a low note that we're not used to? But don't be afraid, because in the midst of this, there is hope. As David goes through from verse 13 to 20, a clarity of the judgment of God in the situation, but also at the same time in verse 18, but the needy will not always be forgotten, nor the hope of the afflicted ever perish. Arise, O Lord, verse 19, let not man triumph, let the nations be judged in your presence. These words are stark, there's a clarity, but in the light of the judgment of God, there is also a shadow of the judgment of God. Strike them with terror, O Lord. Let the nations know that they are but men, that they are but just human beings. Know that God is the righteous judge. This psalm ends with a selah, it ends with a pause, it ends with a meditation. There are another pause at the end of verse 16 with other literary kind of terms there we're not quite sure about. And these are important things. The Lord is known by his justice in verse 16. The wicked are ensnared by the work of their own hands. Stop and pause, think about that. Verse 20, strike them with terror, O Lord. Let the nations know they are but men. Selah. Stop, pause, think about that. But when you stop and pause about the justice of God and think about the justice of God upon the world and upon the wicked and upon the nations, never forget that this is the same God whose name we can trust in, who never forsakes those who seek him. This is our great hope. This is the great cry to God. It's a psalm of praise, but it's a psalm that in its praise has a clarity, has a reality, has a truth about the justice of God at its center and its core. And we will see as we go into Psalm 10 that one side of it, sometimes we can be so sure about the justice of God. And people cast light, people deserve this, people deserve that. Remember, God is a merciful God. Psalm 10 asks us to think about what's going on. We need God to stand up, to rise up, and to be God of the nations, God of as it were, of our lives, so that we can put our trust in him. I'm going to finish there. I hope Hope you've understood something from that. It's a difficult psalm, but there's hope in God. He never forsakes us. Amen.